We'll not got any embarrassing ringtones. And confirm, Robert, the recording started. Thank you. Our guest today, we welcome Heather Sabatini, who's head teacher at Littlemore Primary School, and that's in respect agenda item 4. And Lewis Douglas is graduate intern with the internal audit team. Welcome, Lewis, to Governance and Scrutiny. We'll call for the Sederant and apologies, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. When you hear your name, can you confirm your attendance, please? Councillor Mabin?
Present, thank you.
Councillor Cogley?
Here, thank you.
Councillor Richardson?
Present.
Councillor Canning?
Present, thanks.
Councillor Clark?
Here.
Councillor McGregor?
Present, thanks.
Councillor Lennox?
Here, thanks.
Councillor Crawford?
Here.
We have an apology this morning from Councillor Kyle, Councillor Hogg,
Here, thanks, Lynn.
and Councillor Watts.
I'm hearing.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. And first item on the agenda, we go to declarations of interest. There are any declarations of interest in any of the items today? Don't see anything in the room. And nothing online. Okay, no declarations of interest. Next item is the previous minutes. And it's the previous meeting held on the 5th of September, and we'll need approval as a correct record. Vice Chair wasn't here. I need approval from someone in the room who was at the meeting.
Happy to
approve.
Thank you, Willie. Councillor Lennox. And Councillor Hogg, seconded. And any matters rising from the previous minutes? No matters arising, we'll move to the next item on the agenda. Thank you. And we'll go now to Little Mill Primary School and Early Childhood Education Centre inspection report by HMIE. And we go to the Chief Education Officer. So it's Graham McGinn or Linda Macaulay-Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for being online with you this morning. I have a poorly car. Graham's in the room and will introduce this paper. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, over to you, Graham, again. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Chair. Chair, as you've mentioned, the purpose of the report is to present findings of a report by Education Scotland, HMIE, following the inspection of Little Mill Primary School and Early Childhood Centre. The recommendations of the report are detailed in paragraph 2. The aims of the inspection are detailed in paragraphs 3 to 8, and I would like to draw attention, members, to the inspection at Little Mill being a short inspection, so that's where 2 quality indicators were evaluated, and paragraph 8 shows the quality indicators in a short inspection. Details of the inspection process are provided in paragraphs 9 to 12, and these paragraphs explain who's involved in inspections, lesson observations that take place, and the range of stakeholders inspectors meet with to gather their views. Paragraph 13 explains that in some inspections, Care Inspectorate inspectors also join the inspection, although this was not the case at Little Mill. Paragraphs 14 to 17 provide details about the Education Service Programme of school quality improvement visits, and members will note from the details provided in paragraph 14 that these visits are thorough, challenging and supportive. Head teachers from other schools and, more recently, DHT's deputy head teachers from other schools are involved in visits as part of the visiting team. This is leading to sharing of effective practice across schools, as well as building connections across schools. Paragraphs 18 and 19 provide details of the leadership at the school. And I would like to highlight in paragraph 18 that Heather, who's with me today, is the head teacher at Little Mill Primary School and Early Childhood Centre, and also the head teacher at Dalrymple Primary School and Early Childhood Centre. There's a shared head teacher model in place across both campuses. Paragraphs 20 to 22 provide details of the quality improvement visit that took place at Little Mill Primary School in June 2023. Paragraph 23 details the challenges around staffing experienced in the school. Every class in the Early Childhood Centre in school in Little Mill experienced staffing disruption throughout school session 23-24. This is significant as it led to disruption in learning, teaching and assessment. That's one of the evaluated quality indicators, and raising attainment and achievement, another of the quality indicators. Paragraphs 24 to 31 provide details of the HMIE inspection. I would like to highlight the context of the school in paragraphs 25 and 26. So at the time of the inspection, the Early Childhood Centre had a roll of 12 children and the primary school had a roll of 27 children. The Early Childhood Centre had one class and primary school had two multi-composite classes. Children in primary 1 to primary 3 were taught in one class and children in primary 4 to primary 7 were taught in another class. At the time of the inspection, 42% of the Early Childhood Centre roll and 41% of the school roll had identified additional support needs. Paragraphs 24 to 31 provide details of the HMI inspection, more details, and paragraphs 32 to 35 provide details of the response to the inspection, including the development of the school improvement plan, which is included as an appendix, which focuses directly on the areas identified for improvement from the inspection. The quality improvement team also continues to engage with the school to support improvement, and there are planned reviews and a further 3-day quality improvement follow-up visit as detailed in paragraphs 32 to 33. So, members, that concludes the report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Graham. Or not, Linda, have you anything you want to add at this time before we go to questions?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I probably would add, and really grateful to Heather being in the room, the substantive head teacher of both schools is Simon Leach, who is currently out on secondment. That secondment is also drawing to a close, colleagues. That's due to the regional improvement collaboratives are being closed down. So ultimately, just as additional information, but no, I would absolutely add the context of the report is incredibly important. Clearly, the QIs in respect of the attainment piece, colleagues, every young person in there is going to act as literally 4% on there, and the high ASN. So, you know, ultimately, in terms of reaching the ratings, I was glad that the school were able to pull through on the 2.3 rating in terms of teaching and learning, but in terms of the other QI, that's obviously very difficult when you're dealing with very low numbers. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. We'll go to Councillor Hogg online has a question.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. Obviously, Little Mill is a school that I know very well, and I know the community very well. I've got a few questions, if that's okay. In relation to the attainment was weak in literacy and numeracy, both in the early learning and both in the primary school. So going forward, I take it the two will be working in tandem to try and address the problems that were highlighted there. And although it is a small school, we know that there's, in care of any sort, there's no size that fits all. So for the children with the ASN needs, do they have an identified structured care plan as such that would highlight their individual needs? And are they working with that with the school? I see the attendance obviously is low at 84%. Do we have in place any support meetings with staff education partners to help children and families improve attendance? Is there kind of family learning, any parental engagement overall that we can do to increase our attendance for those at the school? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. Excellent questions. We'll go to Linda and then Graham.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, through you. So if I may, I'll probably direct the literacy and numeracy pickup over to Graham and the quality improvement team. And also I'll ask Graham to answer on the attendance piece, because that's been a whole authority objective. And perhaps Heather will also come in about some of the local approaches in that space. Councillor Hogg, I'll pick up your question on ASN, if I may. ASN plans are statutory duty. in respect of all colleagues across education, and every young person who's identified on the ASN log must have a child's plan in that regard, that then entitles them to the level of support requested, but also importantly, Councillor Hogg, to at least a review meeting per year that parents would be invited along to. Their key adult would be present, because obviously, again, as you rightly note, there's no one size fits all, particularly when we're talking about a school of this very, very small size. But ultimately, you can imagine, colleagues, as well, the skill of the staff as well, and I think that's important not to lose. Multi-composite teaching is a real art form. You know, in terms of trying to meet high levels of ASN need, trying to continually overcome low levels of attendance. So a lot of the young people, when it is 84%, will be coming in having missed parts of school. So ultimately 2 classes there across P1 to 3 and 4 to 7. But to answer the ASN piece, Councillor Hogg, I would agree, they're excellent questions in that space. Just to say that's statutory duty for the school, that they must have those needs met and recognised, and where that's not the case, that would generally come through the school via the head teacher and onwards to us if that's necessary. So it's dependent on the level of need as to whether that would be an individual action plan for the child or an individual learning plan. So Chair, with your blessing, I'll hand over to Graham around about the literacy, Graham and Heather, apologies, around about the literacy, numeracy and the attendance, if that's all right. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Linda. Councillor Hogg, are you okay with that answer about ASN? Before I pass to Graham on your other questions.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, parents will be aware then that they'll have this kind of statutory right. So obviously that can be fed back to them. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. And Graham again for the other part of the question.
Thanks, Chair. I'll provide the response and I'll bring Heather in some further details around about what goes on in the school in relation to literacy, numeracy and attendance. But in relation to literacy and numeracy across the local authority, we have an established strategy in terms of what our approaches to teaching literacy and numeracy are. That programme of training staff continues, and it will continue in terms of the offer to staff who are at Little Mill Primary School and ECC in terms of availability of training, and you will see mention of that within the improvement plan. In terms of attendance, we have held 2 whole authority meetings with all of our head teachers to focus on how we can work towards improving attendance. That included work with partners who attended those meetings also, and that is moving forward. There's an ongoing focus on attendance. Heather will be able to give you some details around about some particular work around about attendance at Little Mill Primary School. But in terms of it being a priority for us as an education service, it certainly has been in those 2 meetings that we've held already alongside partners. So I'll bring Heather in terms of what the focus is within the school.
Thank you. For literacy and numeracy, just to reiterate obviously what Graham has said, we're working very closely with people in the authority, with Gail Elder and with Robert McCallum, to take our consistency approach in literacy and numeracy in the schools and with the staff there. Because of the high turnover, lots of the staff have not been involved in some of the training, so we're making sure that their CLPL is up to date, and we're working very closely with them. And with regards to ASN as well, I'll just jump back in there, Jennifer, if that's okay. We've got three review plans over the course of the year, and there's a very robust ASN policy and procedures in place, which we put in place last year. It's seamless across both schools. Our attendance, our parent council are very well aware of the attendance issues that we have, and obviously it's an East Ayrshire collaborative that we're working on together. I've highlighted lots of the issues in Little Mill with the parents, so they're very well aware of the problems that we have up there. Again, going back to what Linda said, because of the numbers of children in the school, the percentages are much higher due to a certain number of individuals, and those children have got specific cases that we're working on. Obviously, I can't go into those today, but they're very specific. One child is practically a non-attender, and that has a huge impact on our attendance rates in the school. The children are obviously working with attendance with me as well through assemblies, and they're very well aware of the fact that it needs to improve, and we're covering that as part of our health and wellbeing in the school as well.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Heather. Councillor Hogg, are you okay with those answers?
Yes, thank you. Can I just ask one thing? Do we have any support meetings with the families to improve attendance, or is that something we're going to be looking at?
Hi, Jennifer. So obviously, as you know, we've had a home link worker for the last wee while, and that worked significantly well in our schools. This year we've taken a more creative approach, and we're meeting regularly with parents. So we meet them anyway every 6 weeks to go over attendance, and that's, I say, obviously across both schools. Parents come in and have discussions with us, and we send letters home as per the East Ayrshire Council policy. They're all very well aware of their rights when it comes to attendance. They attend parents' meetings, and we bring up their attendance with them at the parents' meetings 3 times a year as well. And it's obviously brought up on the report card that goes out as an interim report.
Thanks very much, Gail. Thanks very much, Chair, for allowing me to ask these questions. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. We'll go to Vice Chair, Councillor Cogley.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Heather, for that feedback. Just I'm trying to understand the context and what the school actually looks like. It's clearly a small school, 27 pupils. So how many classes are there and how many teachers are there? And I'm presuming that as a head teacher of such a small school, or carrying out that role, that you are operational and teach as well. So perhaps if you could just tell us really what it looks like, please. Thank you.
Of course. So at the time of the inspection last year, we had 27 pupils across 2 classes. So primary 1 to 3 teaching a multi-composite class. There's an open area in the middle of the school, so there's 3 different classrooms, and then there's a class with primary 4 to 7. Last year we had 2 teachers teaching in that school. We were self-funded for an additional teacher in that school, just to some dysregulated behaviours that we had in the class. This year we've only got 1 teacher in that class and 1 teacher in the other classroom as well. I had some additional support last year, which I used my PEF funding for, to get classroom assistants in. So we have a classroom assistant in both classes as well to help with the learning and teaching. And we also had an East support teacher up there last year for 2 years. Obviously, with a high turnover of staff, the East support was part of that. And we didn't see much East support in the school last year, unfortunately, just due to health reasons and other reasons. But we do have an East support person in the school as well. Sorry, I'm not class committed. No, I have my management structure is that obviously I'm acting head teacher. I've got an acting deputy across both schools as well, and have I have a principal teacher across both schools as well. At the time of the inspection, my principal teacher was off for almost the full year, and it was myself and my deputy, just covering non-class contact time, etc. in the classes. So last year I was a wee bit committed, but not as much. When you're trying to work across 2 schools, it's virtually impossible to be class committed unless you have to be. If people are off, then yes, I class cover when I need to be, and I need to take non-class contact time at times as well.
Thank you. I mean, I think we can see from that how challenging that must be. But in terms of the actual, the way this sort of manifests itself as far as the pupils are concerned, then, so we have a class of 4 to 6-year-olds, and then a class of 7 to 11-year-olds. Perhaps you could just tell us how that works, please. I'm just trying to get a picture here of what this really does look like in practice. Thank you.
No, it's a very unique school. You kind of have to come and see it to to understand it. So last year in primary 1 there were 2 pupils, in primary 2 there were 4 pupils, and in primary 3 there were 8 pupils, and they all worked together in the same class. Last year there were primary 4 there were 2 pupils, in primary 5 there were 5 pupils, primary 6 there was 1, and in primary 7 there were 5 pupils in that class as well.
Thank you very much for that. That's I think that's quite illuminating, and one can see the challenges that must throw into the mix for the teachers. And then added into that, of course, is the very high level of additional support needs. And if we're looking at what is the figure? I've lost that. It's 42%. How does that compare, Graham? This is perhaps one for you or for Linda. How does that compare with the East Ayrshire average and the Scottish average, please? And again, this is really so that we can understand the issues that you're dealing with here in the school. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, in response to Councillor Cogley, if that's okay. So in East Ayrshire, we track it around about 37%, but the issue at Little Mill is because of those small numbers, Councillor Cogley, that each young person is a significant percentage. If you were looking at this through the light of potentially the Barony campus, you know, each child's not even a percent, whereas actually up here in Little Mill, they're equating to roughly just around about the 4% mark. So ultimately, I'm probably just exercising a wee bit of caution about the use of percentages, because when we relate that back to the number of young people, we can be talking a very, very small number of young people, but actually that have a significant effect on a small population. So there's, you know, clearly there's that piece there, but it's tracking slightly above our average, Councillor Cogley, and again, slightly above our average in East Ayrshire. Roughly, we're a bit above the national average, but we're around 37%, and I think national's tracking around about 36, but it changes on a daily basis as young people are put onto the ESN log or taken off, Councillor Cogley, but that's just to give a rough idea as to the numbers in that space. But I suppose with Little Mill, we're always approaching the percents with caution, the percentage format, because in effect, each young person there's worth about, and I hate calling it that, is worth about, you know, 3.5 to 4% of all of the measures concerned.
Thank you very much for that. And I think that it shows that when you're dealing with the small numbers, the percentages can distort what the picture actually is. Thank you very much. Thank you for your responses.
Thank you, Linda, for the answer, and Heather, thank you, Sally, for the question, Councillor Cogley. For me, the size of the school is something that's needing looked at. It's obvious it's a very small school. I'm wondering what the long-term viability of a school this size is, and what kind of education these children would get, what opportunities they would get if they were in a bigger school. I suppose the nearest one would be Drongan. I don't know if the capacity at Drongan would cope with 27 more. I know there are also laws and rules from Scottish Government, which I'm sure David can ally us with, about rural schools. I'm worried that there's only 12 coming through in the ECC, and how that's going to affect the school role in the future in an already small school. Who wants to come back in on that? Linda or Graham?
I'm not sure if David's in the room, but
Yes,
Councillor, Chair, I would just probably advise you're absolutely right around about the laws in this regard. The Rural Schools Act, I think David will speak of. Clearly, I think we all can see the numbers involved in here. It wouldn't be for me to comment on availability at Drongan at this particular time, but I can come back to you with available space. There are some practices and procedures out there at the moment, Councillor Mabin, that colleagues might call mothballing, which fall short of closure, which put schools into temporary positions of, I'll call it, inactivity. But at that point, probably my legal knowledge will fail me, and I'll pass promptly to our Chief Governance Officer in the room, if I may, Councillor Mabin. But I just wanted to acknowledge that from an educational perspective, we do note the small size of the school, but you know, ultimately, clearly the piece around that's quite complex.
Thank you, Linda. Over to you, David, for the...
Thanks, Chairman and members. I think everybody would recognise, and this isn't a legal perspective, but I think to put it in context, there are two schools of thought. There are a lot of people, in my experience, who subscribe to the view that their children will get and may get a better education in a smaller school setting. So a lot of people do find value in that and do look for that. And sometimes will go out of their way to place their children there because they hold that view and they hold that belief. Equally, as you made the point, Chair, others subscribe to the view that children will get a more rounded and a more full experience in a bigger school where, you know, there's more folk to relate to, wider choice, whatever. And I'm not educationalist, so I will get into that. But both schools of thought and both viewpoints are reflected in any consultations we then undertake. In terms of the whole consultation process, members will be familiar. It's been a while since we've embarked on any kind of exercise, but the legislation around about that, the initial legislation was bad enough in terms of it's a beast. It creates a lot of steps and a lot of issues. And then as that has been played out in practice, and thankfully not us, but other councils have found themselves involved in legal consideration of that. Western Isles found themselves in a spat with Scottish ministers in the past, because Scottish ministers called one of these decisions decision-making processes in, and then decided they didn't have the power to determine it and sent it back to the Western Isles, who said, no, you've called it in, it's yours, and that one ended up in the courts. So the legislation was then amended in light of that experience and in light a lot of what responses and a lot of what groups were putting forward when any authority in Scotland was looking at, for the logical reason you've identified, that if we only have limited resources and we have underutilised assets in terms of the buildings, then it would seem at one level to be a common sense approach to try and get to bigger capacity. Members will be familiar that within the capital programme here, that is the focus, and that when they report on the capital programme and in the school estate to Cabinet and to this committee, then that information is provided around how the schools are operating and what the levels of capacity are. So it's certainly something colleagues always keep under review. The issue with rural schools, for such as this is that there are even extra hoops and hurdles now that authorities need to get over because, and again, it's up to others to hold a view, rightly or wrongly, that wider consideration now isn't just what's the impact of closing a school against a small number of pupils and what's the impact on those pupils if they were to be relocated to the nearest or another suitable school. You have that wider consideration of what other community use is made of these buildings and what's the impact in the community. And, don't just think of our own communities. As I said, one of the cases we played out in Highlands, where you can imagine the size of that area, and they've got schools and places where at the moment it might not make sense to continue to operate it because of the very small numbers. But the argument becomes, well, how will you ever encourage people to move into maybe the islands or the more remote areas? And it applies in the mainland as well. How will people ever be incentivised or motivated to move in if you're reducing that school provision? So where's the flexibility if in the future families do move in and somebody builds a factory and there's jobs, etc. So hence this new approach now of mothballing, which is effectively almost a temporary or suspension or a closure at the moment because it doesn't make sense to run it because of the low numbers, but not quite going the whole hog or closing the building, repurposing it or knocking it down, and therefore removing the opportunity in the future to perhaps bring it back into use should the numbers change. So that's where you're at now. And as I say, without getting into all the detail, the legal elements of it, the furthest anyone's getting these days is if there's no actual real, what I'll call a business case to run a school, then the tendency now at the moment has been for those authorities that have looked at these ones and taken these decisions has been to mothball it in order to get where they need to be in the shorter term and retain that option. But clearly that means you're sitting with an unused asset that will have some level of maintenance cost, even just to keep it secure and unused. But that's the broad situation. I think in terms of the local position, as I've already said, members are well aware that colleagues in FPMS and in education work together as part of the overall capital programme, which is governed by the Capital Programme Strategic Oversight Group. And within that, in the reporting of that to Cabinet and Governance and Scrutiny, members are regularly updated on what actions have been taken, what actions have been identified as needing to be taken in relation to the school estate, and what the proposals are. I think at the moment, as a matter of fact, there's no particular consideration being given to this particular school. If that's a view of the committee, that's something that can certainly be picked up and taken forward in the next review of the overall school estate, but noting that there are extreme legal obstacles and challenges to any education authority that was seeking to permanently close a school. But you pick your battles, and if it's about the here and now and it's about the economics and effectiveness and the best value of a few pupils in a bigger building, then it's always an option, but it's a more protracted and complicated and challenging legal process than it is for the non-rural schools, and that's hard enough. So that's a kind of broad background, but the answer is that we do keep these things under review, and I can't remember off the top of my head when it'll be back again, but members will see the current treatment of these premises and this property in the next iteration of the annual school estate report.
Thank you, David. We'll go to Councillor Richardson, and then I believe Councillor Hogg is wanting back in.
Thanks, Chair. No, it was interesting listening to David there because it was one of the first things I thought about when the issue was raised about the potential long-term viability of this school, because obviously other parts of the council, other departments of the council are looking at population shift and repopulation, and I was really interested in what David said towards the end of his input there, because I think we've got to be careful. I think we've got to make sure that the right hand of the council knows what the left hand's doing. Because if we start a programme of closing rural schools, and then we've got another, part of the council that's looking at growing the population in these rural areas, or at least trying to stop migration, then one of the quickest ways you're going to quicken migrations to close the local schools. So I was just pleased that David brought that point up.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson. Councillor Hogg online.
Thanks, Chair. Just capacity at Drongan, and this is an aside. If we remember last year at planning, we approved outline planning permission for about 100 to 150 houses in the outskirts of Drongan. So it could be there's going to be quite a lot of capacity at that school if these buildings are going up in the few years. It's going to be taken up by the new houses there. So it's just a wee aside, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. Can I also ask what education chiefs about training or absence support for the staff when you've only got a couple of teachers there? What's the process if one phones in sick or has a sick car like yourself, Linda, or also the training side of it? How does, if you've only two teachers, what's the opportunity for one of those teachers to perhaps go to another primary school or spend some time, a couple of months at Dalrymple to get training or support or learn new practices before coming back to Little Mill? Who wants to take that one?
Apologies, I'll take that one, Chair, and I'll probably pass to Heather in terms of the practicalities of that as well. So as is the case, it's very much the same as every other school, Councillor Maben, as much as the net effect of someone being off in there is, clearly it's the class not being taught. It is identical to the process that's across the authority. So the first thing that any school does is look internally to look at cover in terms of that piece in that regard, and ultimately for that size of school they would be looking for supply cover in that case. There's no two ways about that in that particular piece in order to meet the statutory class ratios, which differ clearly across the age ranges, Councillor Maben. So long story short, it's a case of the school would secure supply cover, and again that can be quite difficult when you're in a rural area like Little Mill in terms of getting staff up there, but that's the first port of call. And then clearly we have in a longer term scenario there's sort of HQ cover, etc. So the access to training, Councillor Maben, is absolutely the same entitlement that every staff member across the authority has. That's not diluted by the fact that they have a small class and there's only two teachers in the school. They've got that fundamental right to training and ability to access the same opportunities that colleagues from a much bigger school would have. So it's very much the same protocols, but I absolutely accept the net effects of those absences have clearly been a factor in this report, as Heather's already noted, in that regard to staff turnover. There's also, Heather and colleagues there, in terms of the statutory non-class contact time, Councillor Maben, that is in primary schools where that's covered by another member of staff, clearly when that staff is taking the NCCT. So I'll probably hand to Heather maybe for a more practical explanation, if through you, Chair, if there's anything else to add indeed, Heather, to that.
Thanks, Linda. So yeah, when people are off, obviously we turn to in-house first and look at that. So yeah, with regards to your question earlier, I'm class committed at times if I need to be. I go into class, as is my deputy, and as does my principal teacher as well. Because of the shared headship as well, if we're able to move people from school to school, we do that as well. And obviously I can't move my class teachers because I have 6 classes down there too, so I can't take somebody out of there. But I can certainly move people's non-class contact time and move things around. So staff are very understanding in both schools about the fact that sometimes things need to change and be flexible and things need to move. So that certainly helps. Apart from that, it's just supply cover that we have to get in.
Thank you very much. Graham, was you on as well? No, thank you. Any other questions on Little Mill school report? No other questions. Thank you, Heather, for coming in today. And thank you, Linda and Graham. We'll move on to our next item on the agenda. It's item 4, annual assurance statement. Report by the Head of Housing and Communities, and this one is going to Lisa Ponton, Housing Services Manager.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. The purpose of this report is to seek approval to submit the annual assurance statement for 2024 to the Scottish Housing Regulator and to seek agreement of the annual assurance statement improvement action plan. Recommendations are noted at paragraph 2 of the report. Paragraphs 3 and 4 set out the background. In February 2019, the regulator published its revised regulatory framework, Regulation of Social Housing in Scotland. The framework sets out the regulatory requirements which must be met by all social landlords in Scotland. For local authorities, the regulatory requirements cover the 5 broad areas detailed within the report. Central to the framework is that landlords assure themselves, their tenants and the regulator that they comply with regulatory requirements. Paragraphs 5 to 9 set out the main details of the report and describe the timescale for submission of the annual assurance statement, landlords' compliance with all of the relevant regulatory requirements within the framework, and what action is required where a landlord does not fully comply, format of the statement and its publication. Paragraphs 10 and 11 describe how a landlord gives assurance in its compliance with the regulatory requirements and the recommendation to keep a record of the evidence used in getting the necessary assurance and compliance with the regulatory requirements. The evidence is not required to be submitted to the regulator, however, they may ask to see the evidence or elements of it if they're engaging with a landlord. In order to gain assurance and compliance, a self-assessment matrix has been developed and can be seen at Appendix 1, setting out each of the relevant regulatory requirements and the associated evidence used to gain assurance and compliance. Members will note an amber status within Appendix 1 for the regulatory requirement that each landlord must have assurance and evidence that it is meeting all of its legal obligations associated with housing and homelessness services, equality and human rights, and tenant and resident safety. The amber status is solely attributed to the requirements of the Housing Scotland Act 2014 for all landlords in Scotland to have an electrical installation condition report carried out on all electrical installations, fixtures and fittings within their rental properties. As part of ongoing scrutiny, actions have been identified relative to the Council's electrical installation condition report, and this further scrutiny has identified 417 properties which were unable to demonstrate full compliance with the requirements. Of those 417, 50 are subject to a current or future committee decision, with the remaining 359 actively being addressed. Paragraphs 12 to 17 describe non-compliance and what a landlord should do when it identifies areas for improvements and how appropriate actions should be agreed to address these areas. Not all areas of non-compliance need to be recorded in the statement, and it is up to each landlord to reach a judgment on whether the issue identified is material significant, with any areas of material non-compliance disclosed in the statement. This section also provides guidance on non-compliance and engagement with the regulator, and that the regulator may reach a different view on whether an issue is material if they're engaging with a landlord at a later date, and this is a matter of judgment. Where a landlord identifies an area for improvement and discloses this in its statement, the regulator will not necessarily engage with them. This would only occur if the regulator wasn't assured that the landlord has effective plans and the capacity and willingness to improve or resolve the issue, or the issue presented such a significant risk to tenants or service users that it would require ongoing monitoring. Landlords are required to notify the regulator during the year if anything happens which materially changes the level of assurance in its statement. Based on the findings of the self-assessment matrix, a progress update in the Council's annual assurance statement action plan for 2024 is available at Appendix 2 to this report. Paragraphs 18 to 20 provide information on a visit to the Council from the Scottish Housing Regulator on the 20th of May 2014 to discuss the annual assurance statement. The purpose of the regulator's visit was to help the regulator understand the process landlords undertake in preparing their annual assurance statement, find out how landlords assure themselves about their compliance with regulatory requirements, in particular compliance with tenant and resident safety duties, and identify and share positive practice and any lessons learned. Important to note for members that the then Chair of Governance and Scrutiny, Lillian Jones, was part of this assurance visit to demonstrate the governance arrangements that exist and sign off by elected members as part of our assurance. During the visit, the regulator identified and discussed areas of positive practice. Further, they published a report on the 31st of July 2014, which summarised the findings from all of the annual assurance statement visits to 13 social landlords, comprising 9 registered social landlords and 4 local authorities. To support landlords as they develop their next annual assurance statement, the report highlights positive practice examples identified, including our own practice. Housing have reviewed and considered the context of this report and, where appropriate, used the conclusions contained in the report to support the development of this year's annual assurance statement and associated arrangements. Paragraph 21 highlights, as part of ongoing scrutiny, actions have been identified relative to the Council's electrical installation condition report, which are set out within the Improvement Action Plan Appendix 2. Implications are set out at paragraphs 22 to 25. The Council's annual assurance statement provides assurance to the Council as a landlord, tenants and other service users that we comply with the Scottish Housing Regulator's regulatory requirements and supports the vision and priorities within the East Ayrshire Council's Community Plan 2015 to 2030 and associated delivery plans and the Council's Strategic Plan 2024 to 2027. The Council failing to submit an annual assurance statement to the Scottish Housing Regulator by the 31st of October 2024 would be a breach of the Regulator's regulatory requirements, which are based on the statutory powers given to the Regulator in the Housing Scotland Act 2010. Members, to conclude, this is a positive report demonstrating the continued commitment and breadth of work carried out in ensuring our compliance with the regulatory requirements, and submission of the Council's annual assurance statement to the Regulator by the 31st of October 2024 ensures compliance with its regulatory framework. Thank you, Chair. That concludes the report and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Any questions from the elected members in the room? Councillor Canning.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously a good report and good to see that we're compliant. I couldn't help if we page 52, 51 and 52, I couldn't help. I think it's difficult not to think about the removal of the winter fuel payments when we're talking about damp and mould, and that the recent decision to remove the winter fuel payment. Obviously, the group that are most affected by that are obviously pensioners who may have additional complex health conditions, whether that's respiratory or whatever. So they are more at risk, obviously, with damp and mould if they can't heat their houses. Obviously, with it being a high risk area, we've taken a number of steps, and some of those are listed in the report itself. I'm just wondering if there's anything we can do in a target that group, given the increased risk from health risk from damp and mould as a result of that decision. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Gary Craig.
Yeah, thanks, and through you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Canning. I think as a local authority, we can do what we can to support and to help people, but what we can't do is we can't mitigate the potential impacts that are going to come from decisions made by either UK or Scottish governments in terms of the winter fuel payments. We do have a tenant support fund in place, which was agreed at council a year past in February. It's important to say that that's one-off monies, that's non-recurring monies, but one of the three key themes for that tenant support fund was assistance with energy, where the situation becomes really challenging. To date, we have committed circa £100,000 of that tenant support fund to people who have been experiencing real challenges around heating and energy costs. We've also strengthened through House and Asset Services our approach to dampness and mould with a dedicated tenant safety team, and we have upskilled officers in the team. We've provided them with the best of tech to allow us to respond really quickly and appropriately to concerns that are coming in from households. We also have an increased focus through neighbourhood coaches in terms of annual visits, and dampness being one of the key themes that we look at when we go in. But ultimately, we can't put people's heating on and we can't open their windows, and that's what this is going to come down to. I think even psychologically, the removal of the benefit may mean that people think that they can't put their heating on where they maybe haven't thought about that before, and that is going to have a significant impact. We've already seen the impact over the last 2 years, particularly within House and Asset Services, with a significant spike in reports of what is condensation dampness. So it's going to be a really challenging position.
Thank you, Gary. Councillor Cannon, you want back in?
No, just thanks. Obviously, I mean, that group we need to have a laser focus on. I know officers are doing that, so thanks.
And also I'm thinking you're talking about someone with health problems would hopefully be applying for benefits, and if they're on benefits, they wouldn't lose their winter fuel allowance. And that's going to fall to each elected member in East Ayrshire to represent their wards and their constituents. And if there's someone needing help, they can contact the financial inclusion team to make sure they're applying for the right benefits that apply to them. For me, I'd like to, there's no one else in the room. I'll do a question myself. I suppose this is focusing in on Appendix 2, which is the improvement plan on page 61. There's loads of different safety measures that the council have to keep doing, and the council maintenance team, water safety, electrical safety, dampness, mould. There's loads of different safety checks they have to keep up with. But the one that's focusing on with the improvement plan that's given us the amber is about the electrical safety checks. So I suppose that's where our question should be. The further scrutiny has identified 359 properties that haven't had their electrical safety done, and I suppose that's programmed for completion on March 25. If we can have a comment on that from housing.
Yeah, again, through you, Chair. So you're right. There has been a lot of further scrutiny, and members will remember in November last year at Cabinet, one of the housing papers within the suite identified the need to create further resilience in terms of tenant safety. So that team was put in place and was in place for April this year. The work that they've been able to undertake has identified this gap, let's call it. So we've got 359 properties. I should point out that 358 of those properties all had a completed job within the management system, and they all had certification, but there were question marks over the audit process or the validity of the certification in terms of signatures or sign-offs, and the decision was taken to say that they weren't fully compliant with the regulations, and as such we would be taking a really robust approach and going back and redoing the certification. So of that 359, we've done 118 of them to date, and the remaining 241 will all be complete by the end of this month. So by the end of October, that 359 will be absolutely clean in terms of certification that's fully compliant, and that dedicated team, which are under significant pressure, as I highlighted with regards to dampness, but that team are going to be applying that same process and procedure to all of the tenant safety moving forward, because it's a big target for the Scottish Housing Regulator, and they're going to include it in the ARC going forward. There's going to be new questions and standards included within the ARC, so it's a key focus for us.
Thank you, Gary. And if there's no other questions, I'm looking at Appendix 3, which apparently has my name on it and I'll have to sign. So I'll only do that if everyone is happy with the recommendations on page 43, paragraph 2. Approve Council's proposed annual assurance statement for submission to the Scottish Housing Regulator. Note the progress on the Council's annual assurance statement, improvement action plan. Note the contents of the self-assessment matrix. Otherwise, note the contents of the report. Is everyone in the room happy with that? In that case, I'll be happy to sign Appendix 3. Thank you, everyone. And we'll close that item in the agenda. We'll move on to the next one, which is item 5. Annual Treasury Management Review 23-24 and Mid-Year Update Report for 24-25. That's Chief Financial Officer. We've got Robin Baker, who's Exchequer and Capital Finance Manager. That's a fine title for a job. Robin.
Thank you, Chair. SITFR's Code of Practice for Treasury Management requires that members receive an annual report on the performance of the Treasury Management function, the effect of the decisions taken and of the transactions executed in the past year. In addition, members should receive a mid-year update on Treasury management activity. This report fulfils both of those reporting requirements. Treasury management is the oversight and day-to-day activity linked to the Council's borrowing, its investments and its cash flows, as well as the control of the risks associated with those. How this is done is set out in advance of the financial year when Council receives and approves an annual Treasury management strategy statement, and that includes potential and Treasury indicators designed to ensure that the capital expenditure, investments and borrowing decisions are prudent, affordable and sustainable. Governance and Scrutiny is responsible for ensuring effective scrutiny of the Treasury management strategy, its policies and practices, and Treasury borrowing and investment activity and decisions. Chair, as this report meets the reporting requirements of the Treasury Code of Practice, it should also provide members with the required assurance that the Treasury management activity is being undertaken in accordance with the strategy set by Council, and that the potential and Treasury indicators have not been breached, and in overall terms is compliant with the codes of practice. Part 1 of the report itself, commencing at paragraph 9, provides detail of the actual performance during 23-24. The report does, by its nature, include a significant amount of financial detail, which underpins the prudential indicators and which ultimately feeds into the wider financial reporting process, which concludes each year with the preparation and approval of the audited annual accounts, which should also be an additional layer of assurance for members. In summary, the report includes information in respect of actual capital performance or capital programme performance at Table 1, the Council's agreed utilisation of the financial flexibilities that were available in respect of service concession arrangements at Table 2. At Table 3, we set out the Council's underlying borrowing requirement. It's termed the capital financing requirement. And with Table 4 showing the long-term repayment profile of the CFR as it is charged to revenue each year. Table 5 confirms that external borrowing remained less than the capital financing requirement. And this provides assurance that borrowing has only been taken for capital purposes and not to fund recurring revenue expenditure. Tables 7 and 8 provide an analysis of the Council's debt portfolio and its expected maturity, whilst Table 9 highlights new borrowing taken during the year, which totalled £75 million at an average interest rate of 5.24%. The Council's investment activity, which is the management of short-term cash balances, is summarised for members at Table 10, with the majority of these having been transacted with the Debt Management Office, which is part of the UK Treasury. Part 2 of the report from paragraph 70 onwards provides members with information relating to the current financial year and notes the current projection for capital outturn at Table 11 and the resulting impact on the CFR at Table 12. From paragraph 89, there is commentary on the current and future projections for borrowing and external debt levels, and confirms that these are within the limits approved within the Treasury strategy. Paragraph 90 in Chart 2 illustrates the liability index, which is the most recent prudential indicator that was introduced, and this highlights the required borrowing based on existing debt level and projected borrowing requirements. The cost of projected borrowing in year and its sensitivity to interest rate movement is summarised for members at Table 15. Affordability and sustainability of the current and future capital investment activity are key indicators, and the figures contained in Tables 16 and 17 show the forward projected financing costs for both the General Fund and the Housing Revenue Account. In particular, these confirm that the General Fund projections remain within the 8% affordability limit agreed by Council when setting the Treasury strategy and the budget earlier in the year. Chair, I do appreciate there's a significant amount of financial information contained in the report. However, it hopefully provides members with a level of confidence in the operation of the Treasury function. The recommendations are as set out at paragraph 2 of the report, which is to note the Treasury activity for both years and remit the report for approval at the next Council meeting. Chair, I'm happy to stop at this point and answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Robin. Any questions in the room? Councillor Lennox.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that report. Just in a lighter note, I don't know if it was too evident during that report whether you saw my eyes glazing over or not. A lot of this stuff is well over my head, but thanks anyway. I'll take your word for it that it's all true and accurate.
Thank you, Councillor Lennox. It is a complex report with 17 or 18 different tables with loads of figures. One of the paragraphs that caught my interest, page 80, paragraph 82. At the levels of activity projected, the council would be under borrowed at the 31st of March 25. External loans less than. How I can't get my head around the council would be under borrowing. Like we need to borrow more, and we're under borrowing. Can you clarify that for us, please?
Righty, Chair. When the council incurs capital expenditure, it needs to have resources in place to pay for either the construction or the purchase of the assets. And there's a number of possible sources. We could have capital receipts from selling surplus assets. We could have grants, or we could indeed use current revenue funding to fund that. Once we've applied all that funding, the balance that's left is what the council needs to borrow to pay for. It's similar in some ways. If you buy a car for £5,000 and you trade it in for £3,000, then you've got a grant for £1,000 to go electric. Then you still have a borrowing requirement of £1,000. But you might have that £1,000 in the bank that you've set aside for a holiday. But if interest rates are 5% today and you think there'll be 3% in 6 months' time, you might use your cash. So you'll be under borrowed for a period of time. And that's essentially what we're doing in a much larger scale with the council. We're borrowing at the times where we think it's right. We're deferring borrowing when interest rates are high. So we've taken less money than we need, and we've used reserves and balances to fund that short term. In the longer term, you should always realize your borrowing should equate roughly or to what you need to fund your assets. So it's a timing issue more than anything.
Thank you, Robin. On page 69, table 4, or relating to the paragraphs below it, I've wrote down a note saying, does this include the PPE payments? Are they included in that?
I think that'll be PPP, Chair.
PPP, yeah.
Yes,
Sorry, Chair. Table 4 only relates to borrowing to create council assets, general fund and HRA, so it excludes the PPP. They're subject to a separate funding arrangement where the borrowings included in the unitary charge that we pay each year.
Okay, thank you. So PPP doesn't show up in that table. Thank you very much. Any other questions in the room? Councillor Richardson.
Page 81, point 95, borrowing strategy, 2024-2025. I'm going to have a discussion, or I've got discussions offline, ongoing. But to your knowledge, when it says the council's capital financing requirements (CFR), which is the underlying need to borrow for capital purposes, is projected at 610 million.056 at 31st of March 2025. The council can borrow from external sources such as the Public Works Loan Board, EWLB, to give it its short term, or financial institutions, and I'm assuming that's banks, etc. Or alternatively use internal monies. To your knowledge, has East Ayrshire Council ever in the past discussed or thought about using a local authority bond raised through the stock market to raise money?
Through you, Chair, I'm not aware of this council having ever considered using bonds. I'm certainly aware other councils have gone down that route. The most obvious one in Scotland is Aberdeen, who funded their Marshall College and the development there with the exhibition centre through a bond issuance. I appreciate you have got a meeting with Joe to dive deeper into the subject. Certainly from a practitioner point of view, there's a number of risks and a number of hurdles that would have to be going over before you would go to that level. But
No, that's fine. That's the answer I was looking for. I just wondered if it's something that, as a council, we'd ever contemplated in the past, or if I know I'd brought the subject up for my own group and with Joe. I just wondered if it was a new subject to steer, or whether you guys in finance had thought about it before. No, thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson, and thank you, Robin, for the reply. We're going back to the recommendations in paragraph 2, if there's no other questions. Okay, the paragraph 2 is not the annual treasury management review covering the financial year. Note the update on treasury activity up to period 5, 31st August, and remit the annual treasury management review to the next council meeting on 31st October. Everyone happy with the contents and noting the report, the recommendations? Thank you. In that case, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. East Ayrshire Integration Joint Board, the IJB Internal Audit Annual Assurance Update Report, pages 88 to 93, and this one's by Ailey Mackay, Chief Auditor. Thank you, Ailey.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. It's a short report from me. It's an established format that we've brought to governance and scrutiny since the inception of the IJBs back in 2015-16. So I'm here with my two hats on the day because, as you know, I'm the Chief Auditor for the Council, but I'm also the Chief Auditor for the IJB. So this is about the work I do for the IJB. So obviously, you're not the audit committee for the IJB, but you take an interest in the work that we do for the IJB, not least of all because you approve a number of council days to be used for the IJB, and the determination of the use of those days is determined by the audit committee of the IJB, which is called the Audit and Performance Committee. And since for the last few years, their papers are now public and they can be found on the Council's intranet and website. So, Chair, I'm just going to highlight a few paragraphs, then take some questions. I don't want to dwell on the detail of the work that we do, because that consideration of that detail of the work we do for the IJB is for the Audit Committee of the IJB to consider. So really, this is the assurance at high level that we are providing an internal audit function. External audit have looked at that IJB internal audit function and have given assurance that we're doing what they expect us to do, and we've provided the proper annual reports and detailed assignment reports, which are all available to you and which are summarised in this report. So, Chair, if I go to paragraph 11, and that's just highlighting with a hyperlink for you to access easily the Audit and Performance Committee paper. So that's the Audit Committee of the IJB. And as I mentioned, since 2019, all of their papers have been made public. We had a bit of a journey with the IJB in terms of sharing. NHS Audit Committee is held in private. The Council Audit Committee, Governance and Scrutiny, has always been held in public, and we had to come together and find a good way of working. Initially, that was private. The Audit Committee for the IJB was held in private. It's not filmed, but the papers are public. So there's more transparency around that process. But leaving that aside, this committee has always had access to the detailed reports that we prepare for the IJB, so they're on your councillor's notice board. And we, in this report, I'm confirming that for 23-24, we gave a clean opinion for the IJB. So that's laid out in paragraphs 15 to 17. So the annual opinion continues to be reasonable assurance for the IJB, exactly the same wording as the annual opinion that I brought up in April for the Council to this committee for your consideration. And that annual opinion that I write for the IJB is informed largely by the work that my council team do, but also by some work that the internal auditors of the NHS do. But they do less work around the IJB. The IJB, when I talk about IJB and audit work, I'm going to go into some audit speak now, I'm really sorry. We have what we call the audit universe, and some of you will be familiar with that. So that's the boundaries within which we do our work for each entity. So for the IJB, the audit work that we do is around the stuff that the IJB do. So it's around their governance or risk management, the way they maybe commission services. That's performance management. That's another key area we'll look at. So it's not actually about the operational delivery of services on the ground. So services are commissioned, as you know, by the IJB primarily to NHS and the council to deliver. So we do separate work under your plan, under the council plan, to look at those operational arrangements within the council. So where the council's delivering care home provision, for example, putting some of our more vulnerable residents into care home facilities or care at home, we look at that, the arrangements for those services within the council's audit plan. So we wouldn't look at that as part of the IJB audit plan because that's the higher level. So that's the different audit universes, as we'd call it. So we do actually very little work at the end of the day for the IJB because the IJB has no contracts, no bank accounts, no cash, no employees, they have no payroll. So it's quite limited in terms of the work that we do, but we still do enough work each year that I can do an annual opinion. If I move on to paragraphs 19 and following, that just gives you the assurance from external audit. So at the last Governance and Scrutiny Committee, you heard from Fiona Mitchell-Knight and the team about the council, and they brought up their external audit report for 23-24 for the council and the council's accounts. And exactly the same process happens for the IJB. So Audit Scotland have produced a separate report for the IJB, and it's a very positive report, and that also covers their review of the internal audit function, and there's no issues arising from there. Paragraph 21 puts a marker down for the internal audit plan for the IJB for 24-25, which is agreed again by the Audit Committee, by the Audit and Performance Committee, and all of the audit plans that we've ever had agreed for the IJB are laid out in Appendix 3 for your information, just so that you can see at a glance the body of the work that we've done for the IJB. And as I mentioned earlier, all of the related detailed assignment reports are on your councillor's notice board, clearly set out under an IJB heading. Appendix 3, one more thing, Chair, I'm just going to highlight one page in Appendix 3, and that's page 102. And it'll just give you a bit more of a flavour for the work that we're doing this year for the IJB. We've had a running theme of looking at their performance reporting and their budget processes. And there was never a year where that's relevant, especially relevant in the current year. So at the moment, we are drafting out the audit brief because, as you know, for every piece of work we do, we agree a contract with the client. And the client in this case is the Chief Officer of the IJB, it's Craig MacArthur. So we prepare what we call an audit brief, listing all the methodology, the areas we'll look at, the scope of the work. So the work we're going to do around that performance reporting IJB budget process area is going to focus on the work of the IJB Audit and Performance Committee and their additional new role of overseeing the achievement of the Health and Social Care Partnership Recovery Plan. So for me, it's important that the methodology they've put in place is subject to review from internal audit, and will also be aiming to test the content of those reports to make sure that the Audit and Performance Committee of the IJB can rely on the information that's been presented as part of the ongoing updates on the recovery plan. And the Audit and Performance Committee agreed very recently that they will meet every 4 weeks to oversee the progress of that recovery plan. So that hopefully gives you some assurance that, you know, we're always looking at what's the current, you know, what are the current risks. We're going to focus our work in that area for the current year for the IGB. And Chair, I think that's everything I wanted to say this morning. So happy to take questions as always. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hayley. Any questions in the room? Councillor Canning.
Yeah, thanks, Hayley, for that report. There's a couple of things really. One was a comment. I had a meeting actually with Alex McPhee last week, this week, beginning of this week, just to try and understand IGB financing. And I mean, it's incredibly complex, and I don't envy you actually trying to audit IGB. But the specific question, I mean, is there any difference in your approach to where we're a lead partner? Because in terms of auditing the services that you provide, which is a separate piece from this actually, but I mean, is there any where we're a lead partner, where we maybe have additional responsibilities as a lead partner? Is there any different approach to where we're a lead partner versus a service that we just provide ourselves?
It's a good question. Yeah, and I've been involved since the very beginning of the IGB. I was involved in setting up the arrangements, and as you probably know, the IGBs in Ayrshire were the first to go live. So actually we went live at a point in time when the national guidance still wasn't ready. So we were sort of working alongside the groups that were forming the national guidance. So we worked very closely with Audit Scotland, and then they were very happy with the arrangements we had put in place here in terms of those boundaries. So in terms of you talked about lead partners, so the way I would describe it in terms of our work is, in terms of the IGB, I happen to be the council's chief auditor, but I'm also the IGB chief auditor, and that was a decision that was made for Pan Ayrshire at the very beginning of the IGBs. And actually there was a practical reason for that, because NHS, Ayrshire and Arran don't have an in-house internal audit team. They outsource, and it was going to be a bit more tricky, I think, to get the contract to change for them to take the lead on the IGB. So we take the lead in the IGB, and that's tended to be the model across the country. It tends to be the council chief auditors that have taken the lead. So I take the lead on the IGB work, and I gather in work from my team and work done by NHS internal audit. And we all work together very well, and we also have a Pan Ayrshire flavour to that to make sure that we're as joined up as possible in terms of identifying risks and identifying solutions. In terms of the commissioning element from the IGB, so the IGB, as you know, the money goes into the IGB from the council and the NHS, so it goes into the big pot and then back out again, and basically comes back out to the council and the NHS to deliver what they call commission services. And then some of those might be outsourced to other service providers, third sector, etc. So my other boundary is council. So whatever the council are doing on behalf of the IGB, we audit. So I will audit the delivery of the care at home service, for example, and other aspects that sit within our previous social work services that were transferred into the scope of the IGB. My colleagues in the NHS will look at primary care. So they'll review primary care arrangements because they sit within the boundaries of the NHS, although they are overseen from a strategic level by the IGB. So it really depends where the commissioning arrangement, or they call it a direction, wherever the direction goes, whichever entity the commissioning arrangement is with, depends on which internal auditors will look at those arrangements. I hope that makes sense. So it's kind of triangle. It's a kind of triangle.
The fact that we're lead partner in more cases than any other of the Ayrshire makes a sense to have it the audit function within our.
We also have the benefit that we have the consistency. There's the NHS internal auditors change every few years because it goes out to tender. So I'm the only consistent chief auditor in East Ayrshire that's been involved in the IGB since the beginning. NHS, I think we've had 3 or 4 chief auditors on the NHS side now, so we've got that consistency, and my team have been a consistent presence as well. So that gives us, and we attend the NHS Audit Committee at least once a year, and the NHS give us access to all of their internal audit reports, whether they're relevant for the IGB or not. They give us everything, so we can see the bigger picture, which is really useful as well. to give us to allow us to do sort of wider risk assessments, well-informed risk assessments, I'd like to think.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Canning, and thank you, Ailey, for the reply. It's quite interesting in paragraph 15 where we talk about the language interests me, because as an auditor you talk about reasonable assurance, but then the council report talks about sound assurance and NHS reports talks about green or effective, which all kind of means exactly the same thing, or am I wrong? So,
Chair, more or less, our within councils, we tend to look to SIPFA for guidance as the standard setter for, particularly for local authorities. So the sound assurance, and we brought a report up to committee a number of years ago, we benchmark our assessments to SIPFA guidance. The NHS words change every time they change their provider. So depending on which private company provide the service to NHS Ayrshire and Arden, they change the words they use, change the templates of the reports. So it's very much driven, their shape, the shape of the work that's done there is very much driven by which company has won the tender. So we just work around that. It's not in our world. It's fairly straightforward. I'm very conscious though that we need to produce information that makes sense. Reasonable is a word that we use in our assignments, Chair, but for a whole entity, I can only ever give reasonable. So you would never get sound for the IGIB or the council, because I would need to have 1,000 auditors, I think, working 24 hours a day to do enough work to give sound assurance to a whole entity. So we would only give it, I don't think that's going to happen. So we only ever go up to sound reasonable assurance, which is in my profession what's expected, and that's the kind of top score that any chief auditor would give to a whole entity, a whole organisation. So yeah, we try. I'm always very conscious of how the words land, not only with elected members, with colleagues and with the public. So we're always conscious of that and always happy to take any suggestions from committee in that area, Chair. Thank you.
thank you, Ailey. And APC's Audit and Performance Committee, how do you make an Audit and Performance Committee up? Where did they come from? Are they doing quite similar work to us as GNS?
They also have a terms of reference similar to this committee. The governance arrangements for David, I might need David to come and correct me here because I might use some of the wrong words, but anyway, I'm not a lawyer. In terms of the legislation that formed the IGIBs, effectively, the governance arrangements come under the Local Government Scotland Act. So it's a kind of replica of how governance arrangements were set up for councils, which I think, again, sort of steered the whole internal audit lead to the council chief auditors rather than being based on the NHS, although there were more practical reasons, as I mentioned earlier. So the Audit and Performance Committee, yes, it's got a different name from Governance and Scrutiny, but it effectively does a very similar function, and we have a very similar role in reporting to that Audit and Performance Committee. And they also give an annual report to the full IGIB in the same way that you would give a full report to the council. So there are a lot of parallels between the way that the two entities work.
And the Audit and Performance Committee also has elected members on it from each local authority, but also other people too.
Yes, the Audit and Performance Committee. So, as you know, there are 3 IGIBs in Ayrshire, just to make it even more complicated. So we've got the East Ayrshire IGIB, which has elected members from East Ayrshire Council. It also has non-executive directors from NHS, and it has some other members as well. So again, I can send the terms of reference for that group to the members for information after the meeting. And I think that one of the things that we actually tried to do a number of years ago was get some sort of exchange of experience between the two audit committees. Now, I think everybody's so busy these days that it's probably becoming less and less practical. But I understand that there is an open invite to you, Chair, as Chair of Governance and Scrutiny, to attend an Audit and Performance Committee at some point, if that was something that would be of interest to you.
Thank you very much, Ellie. There's no other questions? Councillor Canny.
I'm just, you mentioned that they're not, you struggle to get them to produce the report to the public, and they're still not, as we are in open session. I mean, as a public body, do they give a reason why that's not the case? Is it health? Obviously, maybe is, but I mean, did they give a specific reason why they won't?
Obviously, I can't speak on behalf of the NHS, but it is something that we've raised a number of times over the years. They don't have the same obligations for transparency that we have in public and local authorities. So it's a choice. I don't think NHS Ayrshire and Arran are any different from any other NHS board in Scotland. They all take a similar approach. And there will inevitably be very, very sensitive information that they're dealing with, which may be driving the decision making. But that's really a question for them. We did, when the IGBs were being established, that question was asked of Audit Scotland and whether they would set some clarification for IGBs. But the response at that time was it was out with their hands, and it was up to the discretion of each individual NHS board. Although there has been that journey in terms of transparency, I just like to stress again that we have no issue in terms of getting access to information from NHS. I'm invited to every single audit committee. I get the papers for every single audit committee, irrespective of whether the items on the agenda are relevant for my role as the IGB Chief Auditor. We also have very good personal relationships with colleagues in the NHS. So, we make it work. It's just, I think any time that you bring two different entities together, there's bound to be differences in the way, and we operate under different legal regimes, which leads to those differences. So from an IGB point of view, it has moved on since inception in 2015-16, which I think is to be welcomed.
Thanks. Maybe a question for Peter.
Thank you, Elliot. Thank you, Councillor Cannon. If we go back now to the recommendations, there's no other questions. Recommendations in paragraph 2. Note the IGB Chief Internal Auditor's annual opinion. Note the 23-24 External Audit IGB report. Note IGB Internal Audit Plan for 24-25. Note the equivalent IGB update report, and otherwise note the contents of the report. Elected members will be happy to note all these recommendations. Thank you. We'll move on to the last item in the agenda. We always save the best to last. So it's out with placements for children, and we welcome Claire Wilson, Senior Manager, Children's Health Care and Social Justice. And I apologise for making you wait all this time to go last. I think next time we'll try and get you in first. Okay, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So what I've presented to you today is the annual report on out with placements for children, which is through the work of the out with placement screening group. So the recommendations are outlined in paragraph 2. What you'll see from the report is in sections 3 to 11, as this report provides the background to OPSG, but in particular its evolution and changes over the year and how it now functions. And I think, some of the context that Ailey's spoken about shows you actually from it changed to sitting within council to it now sitting within the function of the IGB. Sections 12 to 18 provides that wider context in regard to national operating frameworks, monitoring and fee negotiations in relation to children's care and education placements. The report also gives a sense of the cost range of care placements, which are high cost, as you can see from the report. There's also reference within the report to the difficult operating landscapes in regard to private providers operating in Scotland, as well as the challenges of cross-border placements. In sections 19 to 21, it talks about the complex needs of our children and provides some wider context of how that's changing and becoming more complex over time, which places additional challenges in both education and social work and social care services. Section 22 to 28 hopefully provides members with an overview of the different preventative approaches that have been taken in relation to education and care, both separately and together through the work of the OPSG, which will provide members with a good overview of the range of approaches to meet needs, but also to reduce that need for ongoing OPSG support. Sections 29 to 30 provides recent changes to OPSG that are outlined in decisions made to try and address the budget challenges that are outlined in the report for OPSG. In sections 31 to 40, what that provides is further analysis and challenge round about OPSG activity, and it shows that Children's Healthcare and Justice use of OPSG in regard to care placements has been reasonably consistent over the past 4 years, as you can be seen from the table within the report, and that sits round about 20. What we have found, however, is that those costs are increasing over time. So whilst the volume of placements remains the same, the costs increases significantly year on year, and that's outlined earlier in the report. What you can also see within that analysis is that there has been growth in need for education provision support within and out with East Ayrshire, and that's highlighted in the report as well in terms of that range of provision through both preventative support, classroom support and day education support. But you will also see from the table that in 2024 we have managed to make some reduction in those areas within the council for education support. There's also a need for us to reduce the use of out-with care and education provision in terms of longer term sustainability and financial achievability. As you can see, over the past few years, the Health and Social Care Partnership has injected a further near £1 million investment to the OPSG budget. This is further explored within sections 41 to 45 in the report, which provides that financial overview of OPSG. You can see in the report we have made some progress on the budget provision, but this is not without challenges and will be difficult to maintain over time. We're looking for ways to bring care placements down by developing a range of further mechanisms, but as you can see within the report, there are a range of complex aspects to this in terms of ongoing need, increased cost provision, and also our attempts round about preventative approaches. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Claire. Any questions? Online? Want to go? Well, Councillor Cogley and then Councillor Canning. All right.
Thank you very much. I suppose this refers back also to one of the issues that we were talking about earlier, where we were referring to the increase in children identified with ASNs, and that must have a roll-on impact upon the children who are coming within your area. So two issues here. First of all, and we're looking at the trying to reduce the amount that we're spending. The reality is that that amount will only ever increase. So that's one point I wish to flag. And the second is the harms, what is the current waiting list, because I suspect every elected member will have constituents who are saying the waiting lists and the waiting times are unacceptable, and it's something that we all get that's raised with all of us. So if you could just talk about those 2 points, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So really complex area, and as you may or may not be aware, but probably over 12 months ago, that Scottish Government in conjunction with Mental Health Services looked at the new national specification for mental health services in Scotland, which also included CAMHS. Now there has been a change to that in terms of the remit of CAMHS, which is very specific round about assessment and diagnosis in relation to mental health diagnosis. So going back to your point about ASN, and we heard some of that earlier, is what we see is a range of complex needs for children that wouldn't come under the remit of a mental health diagnosis, but would be considered as, additional support needs. So what you have there is that neurodiversity around about autism, Asperger's, ADHD. So within Ayrshire and East Ayrshire, and also a pan-Ayrshire approach that the heads of service, along with the head of mental health services in North Ayrshire, who's that lead partner in delivery of services, have looked at how do we then impact and how we're meeting the needs of children. There is a current piece of work that's been led, and it sits within the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership, that's looking at how we move that on. And there are some challenges to that right now. So what we are able to provide is supports for children if we're able to commission them with specific funding for children with neurodiversity. The challenging area is we currently don't have a clear provision around about assessment and quick assessment of that. And this particular working group, through the Children and Young People's Strategic Partnership, there's a piece of work ongoing on that right now, which would be happy to provide some more information on that through that route, because there's a separate report that's been produced on that.
Yeah. Just to come back in on that one, I suppose if you are a parent with a child who is presenting with neurodiverse needs, you don't really care how it's recorded or reported. What you care about is that those needs are identified and that a plan is put into place and that's implemented. And Claire, I'm sorry, this one isn't necessarily for you. It covers the broad range of what we're doing as a local authority in terms of the care support that we can provide through education or through some other support service. So it's not trying to move stuff out of one budget area because I can't afford to pay for it, but we've got this need and it's getting bigger. And we need to be identifying it and working out how we as an authority and more broadly, how we can actually address it, because it will only get bigger. Sorry, that's just a sort of general statement, I suppose, which reflects on some of the issues we touched on in relation to the Little Mill Primary School. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Councillor Hogg, Chair.
Councillor Hogg, online, you've got a question. Thank you.
It's not so much a question, Chair. In paragraphs 16 and 17, it's quite disheartening to see that private investment hedge funds are involved in the cost and care of our children. It's good that we've got Scotland Excel, but as Councillor Cogley has just rightly pointed out, going forward with the increase on the demands on ASN, then other areas are going to be a less fortunate point than we are in Scotland. But again, it's just showing how the care service is very now being operated with private investors, and it's disheartening to see that. But there you go. That was just a point more than anything else, Chair. Thank you.
Claire?
Yes, thank you for that. It's a very well made point, and it's a point that's not been lost nationally, and I have made some brief reference to it. But both Scottish Government, the Independent Care Review in terms of what the promises said, but also the Children's Commissioner for Scotland has been really, really clear about trying to influence that, particularly around about cross-border placements. There is still some work to go on that, but it's discussed also within the Office of the Chief Social Work Agency for Scotland as well, looking at trying to influence that and change that landscape. And I think around the report highlights that we are fortunate to have Scotland Excel operating with a clear framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg, for the comment, question, and Claire for the reply. If there's no other questions in the room, nothing online, we'll go to the recommendations. Paragraph 2, note the use of out with placements 23-24, note the continuing challenges protecting levels of demand, need and risk, note the challenges to achieve a balanced budget, note the ongoing work to enhance family support. Otherwise, note the contents of the report. Elected members will be happy to note these recommendations. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your attendance today. That was the last item on the agenda. The next meeting is 7th of November. So we'll see you back then. Thank you.